I think there's just a lot of complexities to get worked out in the use of AI in education. And we're seeing sort of small, bright spots of success in limited ways, but wholesale kind of translation of curriculums and pushing through entire populations of students through AI-generated curriculum is probably not where we're at yet.
Welcome to another episode of Tech in the Arts, the podcast series from the Arts Management and Technology Laboratory at Carnegie Mellon University. My name is Hales Wilson, the lead researcher at AmpLab. Today, I am joined by design-based researcher and co-director of the Learning Sciences for Innovators, Marti Louw. She is a faculty member in the Human-Computer Interaction Institute at Carnegie Mellon University, where she directs the Learning Media Design Center. She also serves as the Assistant Dean of Curriculum for the Integrative Design Arts and Technology, IDeATe network. She also teaches the Masters of Educational Technology and Applied Learning Sciences and undergraduate IDeATe Design for Learning minor programs. While there is much to gain in this conversation about all that she does, today we'll be focusing on her work with the Learning Sciences for Innovators program. It is a flagship initiative with CMU Africa in partnership with the MasterCard Foundation. It is designed to bridge the gap between academic research in the learning sciences and the practical needs for the edtech industry, specifically within the African context. The program's primary goal is to help growth stage companies and edtech entrepreneurs refine and scale their products using evidence-based methods. By applying human-centered design and data-driven analysis, LSFI aims to ensure that educational technologies are not just engaging, also demonstrably effective for learners. So before we get into the weeds of the Learning Sciences for Innovators program, could you go into a little bit how your background as a designer may influence the way you think about how people learn?
I don't come from an educational research or a traditional kind of learning sciences background, both a lot of sort of practical experience that kind of drove me towards educational research and design. And so I spent the first probably 10 years of my life right after college in television and film and documentary. And my first job out of college actually was a youth and families program at the Science Museum of Minnesota. And while I was working there, Noon Zappa, which was a local public television program, came in and was filming the assembly of a dinosaur there. And I got really excited because I'd been doing film studies and worked in college and got interested in this idea of children's television and documentaries. And basically, television is an educational medium, which sort of started this trajectory. I ended up working for about 5 years in New York for Japanese production. I speak Japanese pretty fluently in news and television and documentary. And then I moved up to Boston and started working for a production company there that did a combination of both broadcast as well as museum exhibit design, particularly in that case, interactive media. In the early days of interactivity was laserdisc based, but it was kind of a form of early interactivity, and ended up working at WGBH in the science unit on the NOVA program, as well as sort of special programs we do. And around that time, the internet started emerging as a companion to the broadcast. And that became this really interesting medium for games and ancillary material and putting out resources for teachers and educators. And that was starting to shape my interest. It was at that point, like I actually decided to come back to school and was really interested in interactive media as both for education and engagement. That's when it came to CMU. I did a master's in our interaction design program here at the School of Design. And during that work, I became really interested in learning and how do we design for it. And I subsequently went over to the University of Pittsburgh to the Learning Research and Development Center and worked for about 10 years at the Center for Learning in Out-of-School Environments with Dr. Kevin Crowley, and started writing grants and really building a research base to inform the design of learning experiences. And so I guess to answer, that's a long way around of answering your question, is I come from very practice and a design-based approach, and I see a lot of value to learning research, but trying to figure out ways to take what we know from a research and theory base and let it inform, but not weigh down the design process, because I think there's always this tension in the creation, really, even if it's online courseware or educational media or exhibit designs or play-based kind of engagements, is how do we choose the learning goals, and do they come first? Do we backwards design them? Or do we think first about the human experience and the storytelling and the narrative, and then kind of lead our way into the learning goals? And different people will argue different ways. Because of my training and background, I start a little bit more open-ended and a little bit less focused on the learning outcomes initially and more focused on the narrative. So I would say that's probably one of the ways in which my background shapes how I think about research.
Thank you. I didn't realize how extended your background with working specifically in organizations and institutions like museums are. So that kind of leads me to my next question.
Yeah.
So the Learning Science for Innovators program seems like a natural extension of much of the work you do with learning in science and museums. Could you talk a little bit about your journey specifically through EdTech and how the Innovators program pulls from both your human-computer interaction and media background?
So the Learning Science for Innovators program that you described earlier is really building on a strength at Carnegie Mellon in education and learning and computational approaches to really trying to understand both the human mind expertise and how do we sort of support robust kind of learning outcomes using data and evidence. And so CMU has been for a long time pioneering kind of complex computer systems and using data and really exploring how to support learning with technology. We have a learning sciences. It's not a department, but it's situated in the Human Computer Interaction Institute of Learning Design and Computers, because educational research focuses a lot on educational impacts and outcomes, and HCI brings a lot of these concerns of the humans and usability and psychology and human factors and some of these other kind of fields to blend, because learning is such a complex human phenomena. It's embodied, it's cognitive, it's social and affective. And so it is truly, truly interdisciplinary. And so I think CMU and HCI is really well positioned to think about how to bring technology to under-resourced learning kind of environments. And so one of the challenges we see both here in the US and in many countries, including many countries in Africa, is just a lack of trained instructors. We're having trouble in many parts of the world having enough teachers and educators and instructors in place to meet the demands and needs of young populations. And in these environments where they're low resource in terms of spaces and just the learning materials, and there's not yet enough trained instructors, what is the role technology can play? What I really like about this program is that it's not us coming to tell or do the technology. There's so much kind of global technologies that get pushed into emerging economies. Kind of intent of this program is to really work with local entrepreneurs who know their cultures, they know their school districts, they know their schooling systems, they know their national curricula, they know all the nuances of these very complex countries that often have multiple kinds of home languages, very, very different cultures, different religions, and creating learning materials that are culturally relevant is not, I think, really difficult for outsiders to do. So our goal is to go in and work with EdTech incubators or hubs that bring together every year a cohort of 12 companies that have been selected as either as growth stage and really ready to scale. And we bring aspects of our METALS curriculum, so our Masters of Educational Technology and Applied Learning Sciences, aspects of our HCI curriculum, and really work with these entrepreneurs and their teams to upskill and try and help create them, just improve them products and achieve their kind of both commercial but as well educational goals and make sure that the products are continuing to improve.
I appreciate you bringing up that point about some of like the disparities that are happening in education just overall. And that kind of leads me into my next question. One of the interests that I have, especially after taking our technology transforming the arts class, that's like our bridge in the arts management world, I really got into this interest of AI and how it's impacting like K through 12 education. And I know that one of the courses offered now is Foundation AI in Education from Foundations to Innovations, which provides a full overview of how AI works from basic machine learning concepts to generative AI and teaches how to apply these tools to design, build, and improve educational technology and learning experiences. What responsibility do you feel that designers and developers have when building AI systems that impact real people's opportunities for outcomes or outcomes?
Without being a technology Luddite, I think one has to be really, really careful about when and how and why to integrate AI mechanisms and AI layers into educational technology. And it is one of the things that we're struggling with. There's obviously a rush to, especially if you're an entrepreneur, to layer in an AI component. I think it's especially challenging when we think about doing the work and the use of these models in contexts like on the continent where these models have not been trained. There's not a lot of cultural relevance. It's kind of a normalization and a reduction of culture in a way that we're involving these kids in. On the one hand, you can see ready access to information that's been so difficult to access is a wonderful thing. But how do we check that the accuracy of it, the accountability of it? I think there's just a lot of complexities to get worked out in the use of AI in education. And we're seeing sort of small bright spots of success in limited ways, but wholesale kind of translation of curriculums and pushing through entire populations of students through AI generated curriculum is probably not where we're at yet. And so I think it's very much at an exploratory stage and trying to understand what's working and really truly spending the time to research and understand what's positively and what's also negatively impacting learners and not disenfranchising those kind of, especially at the margins, the women or young girls as we rush forward to just adopt AI.
Thank you for that, because I know sometimes when we have like the AI discussion, especially like in different courses and people coming in, it's like a situation where like AI, yes, it's of the future. We better just get on board with it before it passes us by. But I appreciate you bringing in that point of like having to like, okay, but let's kind of assess the situations where it's at now and trying to almost, I guess, meet people where they're at before pushing this new concept and technology onto them.
It's like things can be designed well and not well. And there's ways in which, and the research is starting to come out, that used inappropriately, AI can, cognitively stunt intellectual development and shut down questioning and exploration and inquiry and a lot of things we know about how the human mind works. And so, being really, really careful before we deploy at scale and over time is important and responsibility of those of us in not just the ed tech research, but the people who are pushing it out into the world.
On that, I kind of want to move, as I said, the technology is not my area of expertise, truly. So I kind of want to move into maybe some of the more management aspects, specifically like the donor ecosystems that went into this project. So as we said earlier, that the Learning Science for Innovators is a Carnegie Mellon University Africa initiative, as well as being in partnership with the MasterCard Foundation. But some additional partners include the Co-Creation Hub, Adventures, Etchery Labs, and Hive Collab. Are there any ways that partnerships have changed the direction of the program, maybe in who you serve, what you teach, or how you deliver it?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, from the get-go, this was positioned as knowledge co-creation and a participatory kind of process. So while it is funded by the MasterCard Foundation, we're working with nonprofits for the most part or hubs in each of the countries. And in working with each of the hubs, different needs and things have emerged. So, for example, in Tanzania, their hub was really seeing a need to make sure that the fellows or the edtech entrepreneurs were really adopting and valuing usability early on in the edtech in the testing process and making sure that you were testing not just with private schools, but also public schools and with learners with different kinds of abilities and with learning kind of resources. So, with them, we've developed a kind of usability testbed model as a way to kind of upskill folks on how do you do rapid and effective usability testing and use that to kind of feed back into your development cycle and making sure that your designs are at many kind of taking the temperature of your designs with learners at many points along the way and doing it in a way that's cost effective and still allows you to move rapidly to market. That's a kind of an example of I guess you're asking with each of the countries. We're working in West Africa as well too with Francophone speaking countries. And so there's a lot around translation and making sure our materials are meeting the needs of folks who are Arabic speaking or French speaking, which of course but getting down in the weeds of what making examples and materials linguistically and culturally relevant is something that we work a lot with our partners with and to improve the work.
And then with the Sustainable EdTech program, and with managing like this major like international partnership, what has that experience taught you about scaling this like CMU born idea into a global context while keeping like funding and management sustainable?
I think the way I would answer that, and that's not just specific to this project, but kind of in general, one of the challenges I think university-based projects of this, big, large-scale, center-level kinds of work do is I think academics and I think university and the students and the people that end up working on the projects are so ambitious and have so many ideas. And there's a constant kind of new and more because there's a lot of reflection. And I think one of the challenges with these kind of things is to keep them scoped and to keep them manageable and not keep letting every new idea kind of drag the focus and get beyond what actually the resources of the team are. And so we're constantly having to rebalance and look at what are the priorities and what are the impacts and trying to not do that based on intuition, but work with evaluation, both kind of process as well as external evaluation to check on, like, are we really keeping our eyes on the prize and delivering on the things that matter most? And so I think that's really important is both scope creep, not overpromising, and then having some sort of reflective, evaluative process on what you're doing, as a team pretty periodically.
Thank you. And it actually kind of answered my second question about whether when you're kind of cultivating this pitch or like this project of like helping build technology, are you more focused? And I think you mentioned this earlier on this human-centered impact.
To me, those things are so deeply entwined that learner impact and human impact are like both have to be in first position. You could just be showing cognitive outcomes. People, if they drill and skill on some sort of adaptive tutor, that they can increase their outcomes or like they're doing better on a math unit or something, which is fantastic as a learning outcome. But if you haven't thought about that learner and why they're showing up and what they're trying to accomplish, and if their day becomes just one long series of drill and skills on cognitive tutors, you're going to lose learners' motivation and interest and willingness to come participate in these experiences. And so I think we have to think about the totality in the ecosystem, the learner experience and the learning ecosystem and the sort of multiplicity of kinds of learning experiences, the human peer learning, the use of technology, the not being on the tools and things like that, and really design for a whole learner experience. So both learning outcomes, but human motivation and human aesthetics, the things, the stories and things that, and the becoming ourselves that education ultimately supports. All of that needs to be wrapped into thinking about when and how and where to deploy what kinds of solutions and with who and who's teaching them and who's a technology without a socializing aspect and a facilitator and making it matter is destined to probably not succeed.
I think I want to come out of the context of just the learning science for innovators and move as your role as like the assistant dean for IDeATe as well as like professor of learning in museums class. I wanted to ask department that's IDeATe and that kind of spans over like 15 different academic departments. How do you determine which learning objectives are core when you're building different fields such as like the sonic arts versus like intelligent environments?
Yeah, super good question. So IDeATe's just had its 10th year. And one of the things that we did obviously, whenever you start a program, you have to have program objectives, and then you have to have minor objectives, and then you have course learning objectives. So there's a huge curricular mapping process involved behind making sure all of these things align. But one of the things early on in IDeATe, midway actually, we really revisited and thought about what are our program objective learning goals? Because when you're trying to pull together 9 different minors that are themselves interdisciplinary and the courses within them, how do we keep some sort of like identity around what is the learning and what are the outcomes that we as a program are trying to share with students? And so I don't have the learning objectives right in front of me, but there are things that our courses by nature are intentionally interdisciplinary. That you're going to be learning something from an art, something from a technology, something from a humanities kind of viewpoints, and that you're going to use those to integrate and build and make something in the world. There's like a project-based or a making component. It doesn't always have to be physical. A lot of our classes do have a tangible physical kind of computing aspect to them, but other things are more conceptual. But you're constantly putting the ideas to work with other people in teams. Those are some sort of core qualities of IDeATe courses. We also have that our courses want to make sure that it's not just we're hearing the histories and the perspectives in fields of art, design, and technology that aren't normally heard. So there's kind of a requirement that we bring those viewpoints into the curriculum. Another thing that whenever we're looking for courses or new courses, there's some sort of some basics that are kind of a requirement for them to be part of the IDeATe network. One is that there are no prerequisites. They're open to all students on campus, and that there is this kind of some sort of making involved, that the ideas are not just going to be written and talked about. They're going to have to be implied in some sort of creation of an object or a installation or an experience, an arts-based kind of experience. And so that's been a way to kind of frame and continue to try and build a program of courses instead of minors organized around things like intelligent environments or physical computing or soft technologies or in design for learning in the case of this minor.
You brought up, some of them being like you're creating something tangible versus not. And I know in this specific class, we're asking us students to test prototypes with like actual users, like such as our children's museum visitors. How does real world feedback inform the way you iterate on your curriculum year over year?
Real world feedback from the museum or from the students?
From the museum and those who are being observed and who are being used to test the prototypes.
The public's participation in the students' product creation, their own learning. There's the museum and I guess I'll say I've worked really hard over the years. First, I worked with the Natural History Museum for probably the first 4 or 5 years. And the last couple of years I've been working very closely with the Children's Museum. But developing kind of one of these deeply engaged courses with a lot of access to the museum takes a lot of relationship building. And maybe because I've worked with both of these institutions through research and grants and have worked with both the education and the exhibits teams in both, kind of a way in to know, to start a conversation, knowing what their priorities are, knowing where their funding's coming from, know where they're struggling with their professional development or areas of future programming that they're not quite sure how to handle. Both these museums, for example, have really large kind of knotty problems to try and understand how do you interpret a 20th century museum in the age of the Anthropocene, right? How do you talk about nature? Do you still call it the Hall of Geology, or if your funders want to call it the Hall of Energy? How do you handle these kinds of, disciplinary boundaries that are breaking down in the case of the Natural History Museum and becoming much more interdisciplinary? And then you walk into the politics of, climate change or not climate change, or the languages that you use, and does evolution exist or not? So there's those kind of issues that, like, for example, a Natural History Museum works on, that finding a way that a group of young students who represent a future or current museum-going population, what they're thinking about, how they would think about engaging youth, that the 20s are often a difficult group of learners to bring into a museum. Similarly, with the Children's Museum, they're responding, and museums as civic institutions have to respond to kind of the discourses of the moment, the ideologies, the politics, the challenges. And the Children's Museum for the last couple of years has been looking a lot at empathy and kindness. Like, this is something that we actually need, if you not teach, but we need to sort of become platforms to engage in conversations in families and groups as publics. What do we mean by kindness? What does it mean to have empathy? How can we care for people that don't look like us or talk like us? Or having a group of really talented CMU students work with them in a really integrated fashion about those ideas. There's just a lot of mutual benefit going on. And so I think that's been kind of the learning I've had over the years, is not bringing a topic idea to them, but really sitting down with them and understanding where are the hardest things that they're working on, and how could we have their investment in time and their opening up their doors and spaces to us provide this idea of mutual benefit. And the thing that is surprisingly come out of it that's kind of interesting, and both museums got to this and not explicitly, was they used the engagement with us as a lot as professional development, getting your staff members to talk about what they do, to present to the students, to review the students' work, and to learn along with the readings and the things that the students are learning, allows this kind of, what do you want to call it, like learning community, and lets, again, their staff have a moment on the stage to articulate what it is, what they know and do, and see that to a young group of professionals, and open up this, what do you want to call it? Getting into the museum world is not an open door. It's kind of there's not a lot of jobs, and it's not clear what the entryway is. So showing students what this nonprofit world looks like, I think, is a lot of benefit as well, too.
Yeah. Your point about it being building relationships is an important part of like kind of cultivating this project and how the class is set up. And me being in the arts management world, we're hearing all the time about, like having to network, and your network is super important. But what I really liked about this class so far is we are out there. in the world, talking with Anne, and now actually going to there this weekend to do our observations. I think there's kind of something beautiful about that mutual benefit, as far as like we are getting kind of that real world experience, but also, for instance, these things of like behavior and how truly environment can shape our understanding and how we can impact other people's understanding of learning is very beautiful, but also understanding that a lot of arts organizations, they don't have the funding to hire a group of researchers to come and help them design their exhibits. So it's great to have like this overlap. But so yeah, I'm really enjoying the class, and I'm very happy for this partnership that we're doing with the Children's Museum. So I think we've covered a lot in our conversation, from like your design and research background and how that's impacted your work in museums, and then here at CMU and both like the human computer interaction and of course the learning science for innovators. Do you have any words of wisdom for people who are wanting to work in learning or technology or both?
First of all, I'm always surprised that more students don't see education as a sector and as a professional area. And I think that's maybe we need to do a little bit more work showing all the incredibly exciting opportunities you can get involved in when you know something about human learning and what delights and engages and allows people to have kind of growth and development. And so I guess one thought I have is learning is core even if you work in corporations, there'll be professional development and upskilling and creating training materials that as you rise through the ranks of an institution, you might be having to help professionally develop your own team or yourself. There's, these arts-based and museums and informal kinds of learning. There's the kind of learning as a parent and parenting that you'll do. And then there's the whole field of education. And education is always in such dire need of talent, and I would just love to see as many people who could find a love and a passion around teaching and learning and creating these resources and systems and projects. Maybe really think about education and learning broadly as a place that you could make change in. It may not always pay the highest bucks, but will be super rewarding, and I doubt it's going away.
Thank you so much, Marti. This has been, I think our listeners from all over the arts and management and technology sphere will be able to pull a lot of really good and like pertinent information from this interview. So thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Tech in the Arts. If you found this episode to be informative, educational, or inspirational, be sure to check out our other episodes and send this to another arts or technology aficionado in your life. If you want to know more about arts management and technology, check out our website at amt-lab.org, or you can email us at info@amt-lab.org. You can follow us on Instagram at Tech in the Arts, or on Facebook and LinkedIn at our full name, Arts Management and Technology Lab. Our season runs from September through May, so feel free to follow us on your preferred podcast app, be it iTunes, Spotify, or YouTube.